Yo, new thread, you turn the corner and we got people looking for ways to cure what has ended in disaster. How heroic. They say it's no secret that FGO has had its ups and downs in its history. In the event that the story ends up being mediocre or bad, sometimes we try to see what changes could have been made to improve the story and the experience. Then there is the rare opposite case where one seeks to correct or improve the weak points that a story already had. By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your request. I really like the direction that this post is going because it speaks a lot to fine-tuning your mistakes, capitalizing on what worked, and actually providing a proper alternative instead of just sitting there and complaining incessantly like most people do. Before we get off into it, I will say that to me at least, it seems that people have this unrealistic relationship with fictional content in general. That if a story isn't great all the time, then the whole story is bad overall. And what I find more and more between consumer perspective and me just taking in more media myself, what people care about the most more than anything is the actual entertainment value, whatever that may be. It doesn't have to be right all the time. There is no right all the time. It doesn't even have to be right most of the time. But if people walk away gaining more than they came into the story with, then it's fair to say that that is a just exchange for their time. I always hear about what could have been done here, what could have been done there, completely glossing over all of the improvements that have been made, and you're actively seeing them over and over again. And FGO wasn't even supposed to go on this long. It was supposed to have been ended, and they're still seeing it through. Just looking at the scope of things, we're at least 2/3 into the story. So at this point, what most people think about the story, they're gonna think that all the way into the end, because in the end, it's usually about the journey over the actual ending. A good ending is just icing on the cake. Some of the best series have very controversial endings. But what I'm saying about FGO, looking at it for what it is, you walk away with way more good than bad. I will continue to say that. There's a reason why, even after all these years, people still stay for the story. Most of the core fans have burnt out, and they're just there to see how it ends because they've already invested so much. Because the game itself isn't what's keeping it going, it's the story. That's how strong the story is. Everybody that's actually enjoying the game itself is probably either new, came in halfway, or it's the former where they're trying to see that investment through, and so they continue to play the game alongside keeping up with the story. So we've long since passed the marker for FGO being a failed series from a narrative perspective overall. But just like any series, there has been things that could be better, absolutely. I just say that because I don't see enough people champion that perspective overall. Everybody is just so quick to lash out at what's wrong, what we don't have. Why didn't they do it this way? Instead of appreciating what we got. And we have gotten a lot over these 10 years. Can you believe that? Next year will be the 10-year anniversary for FGO. That is a real journey. And it's way different from most in the aspect that you actually got to be a part of it beyond just watching and reading. You got to literally play through it. And that's a different type of investment. Not many creators can say that they have that. And that's another reason why things like this exist, because people care so much because of that. It's all in the spirit of they just want to see one of their favorite series do well. That's it. By this time in the story, if you look at part 1 versus part 2, the worst Lost Belt is better than majority of part 1, and that's objective. Most people don't even claim the first half of part 1. So the fact that the story made such a huge climb in quality between the two segments just speaks to the level of undermine of how much good already has been done. And if we're just being honest and we're just being toxic, I'll be the first to say it. It's just funner to talk shit. That's where a lot of it comes from. Most of these people don't even believe what they're saying. They just do it to play devil's advocate or for engagement. Getting into one of their main questions, they say, therefore, based on your experience or perspective, think of 1 or up to 3 changes you would make to a singularity or a lost belt that could help improve the overall story. Now, I can't get to everything in this video because that's way too much to cover. I mean, even if we just did part 1, we'd be here all day, but we will look at everything in another video later. What I will say, as of right now, 3 things that I would give to change the story in totality and not just one chapter. I would definitely give Ritsuka dialogue, and I've seen quite a few people mention that. Now, we've already been through this somewhat on the channel where we talked about Ritsuka's position in the story. I, for one, never held that against Ritsuka because, like I said, I view Ritsuka as a vehicle. But keeping that in mind, I definitely would have liked to see him having some dialogue because then I would really be able to get into his mind. And it feels like that not being present takes away an opportunity to bring the story to another level. Because in reality, for the most part, Ritsuka's thoughts is just somebody thinking for him and him literally just nodding his head yes or no like a bot. That's what I mean. Like, I want to hear him say it. If he's frustrated, I want him to be frustrated. If he's excited, I want him to voice being excited. I don't need anybody else to tell me how he feels. That's just what it should be anyway. The second, I would love to see some bad ends. Now, for somebody that came into FGO and they're unfamiliar with the original work, they really missed out because bad ends give a lot of backbone to the character that you wouldn't know about otherwise, unless you saw the bad end through to completion. And there's a lot of different scenarios where I see people call out all the time where we get saved by narrative because you are my friend or something like that, when it really could have capitalized on them going through those motions and seeing how that would have turned out if they went with that original thought. And they've even entertained the idea of bad ends in the story, like how Kiara could have killed Ritsuka in the Seraph chapter, or the Garden of Lost Will in LB6, which pretty much perpetuates the idea that they could have done bad ends, but they chose not to. They chose to keep the story linear because, as with most things, I believe they just don't want to confuse the great bulk of the fan base. With so many things going on already, there is a lot of characterization that is left to be desired since something like this was cut out of the equation. And as I mentioned before, I would have took bad ends over another half-hearted event or another half-hearted servant just so they can churn out more money. And 3, committing to the overall objective. And this could mean a lot of different things. For example, don't tell me that something could happen, show me. Don't lead me on about this alternative that you are never going to circle back around to. Bring it to a conclusion. And in this same light, you can use this with the overall stakes of the series. Like our deaths. I went through a few of these already and I saw somebody say, I don't like the fact that Musashi died. I think that was a bad idea. I'm like, bro, what? You think Musashi dying was a bad? Musashi is one of the only things that they've actually committed to through the entire story. Are you insane? And it wasn't even the real Musashi. This is what I mean by committing. If you're going to take a character out, then take them out. Because most of the time, our stakes don't actually exist. Because by the end of the chapter, we end up befriending our own version of that spirit anyway, and they all come back to us to Chaldea. Nearly every single one of them. So it gives the idea that there is no real stakes. Because at the end of the day, you are my friend. Talk no jutsu will always solve the day. There is a reason why people like Solomon hold such a high level of weight, because when they said he died and he got erased, we haven't seen him since. Not one time. Haven't heard about him. We see whatever happened to Roman's body here and there. People think it's Goetia, whatever. Even that is still yet to be explored. But when he got taken out the story, that was it. When Musashi got taken out of the story, that was it. And so far, they've held true to that promise up until now. And I'm completely fine with that, because a series needs stakes. That's what makes a story good. feeling like there's stakes, feeling like there's something to lose, feeling like there's a level of realism. The first comment, not sure about each, but God, Sif needed more development in LB6. Personally, I'd say showing us her kind self during the past sections with MASH could have helped and made the player wonder what happened to make her the way she was in the present. Because as it is, the whole bit about her actually being a kind fae in her dying moments with zero hints leading up into it felt like the writers going, trust me bro, here's why she's actually a good person. 100%. And before I get off into Sith, they did the same thing in Tunguska with Tsiah. Not one time has Tsiah showed us that she cares about humanity. Even when she helps us, it's to help herself in a roundabout way. That's not really helping us. That's manipulation, and people get that confused. They think, oh, since she's helping us, she's a good person now. No, that's what a manipulator does. A manipulator helps you to see what they can get out of you. There's no way that she would actually let Ritsuka die off if she's trying to make him a tail in the first place. So the idea of saying, oh, she actually could become a beast because she really had humanity's best intentions at heart, it's like, where? Show me. Stop the foolishness. When it comes to Sith, I do feel like, in a way, her character overall, in comparison to the other fairy knights, Bargus, Melusine, she took a real shot in the foot. And I understand that that's on purpose because as the actual child of Morgan, she maintained a high level of love that those other characters didn't, until they were able to find that later on in the story itself. And so the trajectory of those characters couldn't be the same for that reason alone. At the same time, it just feels like the way that her background was handled could have been shown the same level of care as those spirits, even though they do come from different circumstances. But instead, she's sitting over here playing house with Burl Gut of all people. And it's like, if that's the only characterization to somebody that's supposed to be a good person, that is not a good look. And it looked as if she only felt bad when something bad was done to her. Bump being insecure, it reminds you of those people that make apologies when they get caught. It's like, you're not sorry, you're sorry that you got caught. You look kind of crazy right now. Because otherwise you wouldn't be doing all this. You wouldn't. You would have been on the same type of timing that you was before. So why are we sitting here playing pretend? That's how it looks. And not just that, but you know, with Melusine being part Albion, with Bargus being the black dog, Sith once again just seems like there's a lot left to be desired. Where's her other half? Where's the things that make her unique and not just this trauma victim? Because if we're gonna play that card, then everybody is a trauma victim. She is by far the least talked about of the fairy knights, and for a good reason. They definitely could have done things to circle around and patch up that. Here's another one. This time I'm saving Coral and taking her with us. And this is coming off the back of LB6 not too long ago, so it makes a lot of sense for this to be here. As a matter of fact, I don't think I see anybody say anything good at all about Aurora. And it's funny that they bring this up because Aurora does come up in another comment. But yeah, what she did to Coral, on top of this constant idea of her needing to be on top, really just speaks to who she is as a character. Coral for sure would have been one of the people that we needed to save. And I hate to say it, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear it, but I'm glad we didn't take Coral with us because we needed to see that out of Aurora. We needed to see that happen to get the full scope of who she was as a character. Because if that didn't happen, we would have had somebody saying by the end of the story, well, maybe we just don't understand. No, sir, I understand completely. You are delusional. You need help. And you don't even realize it. She's one of those people that's so deep in that she doesn't even realize what she's doing to herself and the people that's around her. And the very fact that it took her death to wake up to that, the fact that it took being on your deathbed to realize what type of person that you've been after all these millenniums, not just years, but millenniums, speaks volumes. So I'm not looking for no pity party for Aurora. I think she works really well as a villain, as an antagonist even, but that's exactly who she was through and through. She reaped what she sowed. Here's another one. Septum, flip around the good and the bad guys and who Lev is working with. Nero is fucking shit up, is her natural state of being, and ancient emperors of Rome are being the responsible parents telling her to knock it off. Agartha, lighten up the one-handed writing in general and replace Fergus Lily with Blackbeard Lily, a young Edward inspired by tales of adventure and plunder, to contrast with Scheherazade, who is afraid of the danger and death such tales bring. LB6, give Sif more screen time, chop Aurora's speeches by half, and have Melusines' last act of defiance against the abysmal worm incidentally kill Aurora by accident as a way to chop her dialogue in half. Okay, this person just clearly wanted her dead. Fate Samurai Remnant collab. There's more than 3 things I'd change here. For the Remnant collab, I am NA, but I did look at some of it. For the part that I have been through, it seems as if it's another chapter with cool ideas, odd execution. I'm not necessarily gonna hold too much against them for copying the general basis of Remnant, because a lot of people haven't played that and have no intentions of playing that. So this may just be a way to expose them to that narrative in a different way. Of course, for Tight Moon, it's just a way for them to double dip on the money and not really do anything to change the base story, just make slight adjustments to it. They did the exact same thing with Nero's story with the arcade collab, so it's not anything particularly new. For LB6, I think most people are in agreement that Sif has a lackluster amount of characterization, not just for the person that she claims to be, but also in comparison to the other members on the roster, especially considering that she's supposed to be one of the most important. Aurora, everybody wants Aurora to get clipped. I'm seeing people say that she should be burned at the stake. I can't too much disagree. She did what she was supposed to do. But I will say, and this is not just for her, but this is for a lot of characters, once I get it, I get it. Like, I don't need you to tell me 20 times that this person is a sketchy person. You can show me a few things, and if those things have enough gravity, then I'll be like, okay, that's enough. You don't gotta show me or tell me 10 times where this person's true desires lie if it's already right out in the open, either through their dialogue or the actions itself. Agartha, I'ma say, and we're gonna get into that later, but Agartha and Salem are often viewed as the weakest part of 1.5. Now, I like Salem, but just like the person is saying in the comment, Blackbeard would have been way more appropriate for the things that was going on as opposed to Fergus, especially considering that the Blackbeard that we get is always comical and people have been waiting, literally begging for them to give Blackbeard an actual character for the longest of time now. This is one of the true issues. I gotta get down with that. There is no reason for the pivotal background that Blackbeard has in terms of his mythos for him to get treated the way that he does in the series. I mean, for the intents of the way that Blackbeard is used in the story, he could have been an OC character, because there's really nothing that speaks to him being Blackbeard as much as it could be. This whole otaku thing could have just literally been anybody else. Would have been a great character as somebody else. I'll give a great example. Osaka Behime. There's not a lot known about Osaka Behime, so nobody's looking at her being an otaku as a bad thing. Nobody cares. It's like, cool, she's the neat. That's just what she does. But knowing who Blackbeard is just jarring and almost insulting, especially considering that you had ample amount of time to work with this. And then Septum is often viewed as one of the weakest, if not the weakest part of part 1 FGO. But I see a lot of people complain about London too, which is kind of weird nowadays because I don't recall people hating London that much when we first went through it. but it does make sense with all the things that were present. The clock tower especially, why a lot of people would feel that way. I don't really care for Columbus in myth and out of myth, and it really is a shame because I feel like Agartha suffers from a strange lineup. Like, I guess Columbus works as the dickhead that he is because it kind of makes sense for his character in general, so I have no problem seeing him go down. I will say that the roster, most of it was strange, but in an odd way, it did find ways for the characters to bounce off of each other. Like he was saying with Scheherazade and the way that she told her stories and her myth, it's just weird to see them not do anything with that. In terms of Septim, I kind of spoke about this before in the Septim video where I explained the chapter, how the drafts got thrown out, and you can tell that we were kind of supposed to get what was in the arcade collab in Septim, and they didn't want to do the same thing twice. So they ended up pulling back on it, and we ended up with the story we did with a bunch of hints of Nero being a beast or being this alternative character, but never really doing anything to push forward with that. And ultimately, it just seems like a huge waste because by the end of the story, nothing really happened. And at the same time, there's a lot of things happening for no reason. Nobody really got characterization. The people that did get characterization didn't need it. If you're in Rome, you should be characterizing the Romans, right? But for whatever reason, you decide to characterize everybody else, if you can even call it that. Like the fact that Caligula didn't get character up until LB5 makes no sense. If Caligula didn't have LB5, especially being who he was, it would have been a shame. It would have been an absolute shame. Same thing with Romulus. And it seems as if they're working with the same issues that Nero had. Whoever had the overall authority on that knew that they were going to use those characters later on in the story. And I mean them using Caligula and Romulus and LB5. So they decided to go with what they had, but you end up with a lot of bare bone characters that should be the literal pinnacles to their society. And then the only character that does get any actual dialogue, that being Nero, you have her saying a lot, but you also have her saying a lot of nothing and having the cast just running in circles. And for what reason really? Especially considering that majority of that was to hype up what she did in her background and you never actually address it. And then the crazy part about it, and this is what I mean about the unwillingness to commit with Type Moon. This is exactly what I mean. It can work in so many scenarios because even when they do address it in the arcade collab, Nero's background, they try to play her off as the victim. Oh, my mom made me this way. And it ends up in a situation where they try to manufacture some type of sympathy from the audience by not allowing her to own up to her actual mistakes. It was bad influence. But again, like I said earlier, if you're gonna make that excuse for her, you can make that excuse for anybody. You can make that excuse for anybody that wants to do harm, for anybody that wants to do evil, for anybody that decides that they don't want to hold themselves accountable or the people hold them accountable in hindsight. Like at a point, you really got to take a step back. You got Altera there for literally no reason at all, literally wasted Attila the Hun's character. I'm still trying to figure out why they did that to this day, because now we're probably not going to get an actual Attila the Hun. You can't say that Attila's too controversial because you're literally using Nero. The real Nero, the one that you so desperately try to hide, is just as bad for different reasons. So speak on it and stop being so scary. You're taking out everything that made the character, and what we end up with is the bare bones PBS version that doesn't even hold on its own anyway. And that's not just for those 3 Romans, that goes for the rest of the Romans that they could have capitalized on too. I'm still waiting on the real Julius. I like Julius's background. They did my dog Julius so crazy. They did him so crazy. I'm surprised they didn't do Napoleon like that. I'm actually shocked. But again, Napoleon was fortunate enough to end up on the Lost Belt side of the stories, and so we all know the treatment there is a lot better. We should have had Avenger Boudica. Didn't happen. Still waiting on Avenger Boudica. I think since most people don't know the background of Boudica, they don't even realize how much they should be offended on what they did with her. They don't even realize it. Like, it is really sad. How do you have Boudica, Nero, Caligula, Romulus, and Attila the Hun all in the same chapter, with Rome one of the biggest societies known to mankind, and people are saying it's the worst one by far. That's crazy, bro. Here's another one. Lost Belt 3. Honestly, the only good characters in that chapter was Jinka, Spartacus, and Qin Shi Huang. Every character felt like they were just there. I get that Mordred already had her role in Apocrypha, so not much is being done with her nowadays. But is there really no other way she could have got developed differently? How about the moment she and Spartacus learn about each other's stories and how they were rebels? Again, great point. Spartacus is yet another character that I really like his background. Did him dirty. After the first time you showed him as a berserker in Apocrypha, that's it, bro. He doesn't need to be this mind-numbing beast everywhere else. He doesn't. And you know what? I can say that might have worked well in Apocrypha's favor, strictly because there were so many characters on the cast already that getting Spartacus out of the way early helped for the characterization of the people that actually did get it. But at the same time, if you were going to do that, then why put the character in the first place? I get tired of knowing how great the background of Spartacus is and just keep seeing him in these different iterations as this mindless bot, when really he could be one of the best characters in Fate. Could have been, should have been, still trying to figure out what happened. So yeah, his characterization in terms of him bouncing off of Mordred and them both being rebels, there really could have been something heavy there. But since they're so passionate about him not getting an actual class for whatever reason, there's never anything to pull from it. Hell, even in the Remnant collab, Spartacus is in that collab doing the same thing. Great character even when he can't talk, but when you can't do anything, there's only so far you can go. If you're going to continue to not give him dialogue, he could have been anybody, and at that point he's nobody, and that really is a shame. Same thing with Mordred. I want to see Mordred address her own insecurities and stop trying to make Artoria shoulder all the blame for what she did. Cause I never liked that. I get where she's coming from, and she's not wrong to feel that way, especially being the child. But just like we were saying before, at some point you have to take some accountability. You gotta take some accountability for your own actions. I would like to see a Mordred taking some accountability for her own actions instead of every iteration being the overly confident, I don't care knight to really hide that she's really one of the most fearful and insecure ones when the light really gets to show. And that's another reason why I'm glad that Castoria exists for Artoria's development, to speak to another side to her character where every move that she makes isn't conflicted by her trauma, because that's the great bulk of who she was in the main canon, and as King Arthur she's way more than that. I think Jinka, surprisingly, especially considering the role that she played, having way less in her background than most, like a Spartacus or Qin Shi Huang, in both her situations, not just LB3 but Septim also, really works well with what she's given and is really true to who she was in her background. Probably one of the most true to it characters in her respective rosters. Sure, there could have been more, but she didn't have nearly as much to work with as the people that were around her. It's ridiculous. Qin Shi Huang, I would say, is not just one of the most interesting characters in that singularity, but the way that he does things, his design, and the way that he thinks in the chapter itself is one of the most interesting characters in FGO, period. And I think I've seen some people say this as well, but it doesn't get highlighted that much, because after a character shows up, if they don't show up again, they end up becoming this afterthought. But I think he did a really good job in the chapter for what he was given and the gravity of his character. He feels just as big as he was in his background. Also, it's not just like his name is for show like Spartacus, which is also really good. This is the same comment, same for Naja, and it gets even worse with her in LB4. Hell, Naja could also help Qin Shi Huang understand more about humans, like how Jinka tried, since she decided to side with humanity, for example. Yeah, the way that they do Naja, honestly, I do love Naja for her design and what she brings to the table with this very cryptic way that she speaks. But I'm gonna be honest, bro, this entire cryptic language thing, these berserker classes, it's cool, but when you do it with these characters that really could have a lot to say, all people are gonna leave with is, man, they could have been so much more. Like, as I think back on it, Lancelot by far is one of the best berserkers that we have, because he says a lot without saying anything, and he actually has that other side to his character to make up for that in Camelot, so it doesn't feel like you're losing out on anything. But everybody is not gonna get that, because one, everybody isn't as impactful in myth as Lancelot was, and also him serving as one of the Knights of the Round kind of gives him automatic points for him being a more important character than most, because you're right behind Arthur, who is literally one of the original characters of Fate, period. You have to be important. But yeah, same mistake goes with Naja. Naja has a great background, and I've covered Naja's background on the channel. The lore is up. He shouldn't have been a gender bend. He shouldn't be a berserker. He should have real dialogue. He should be one of the strongest spirits that we have. Should be one of the most interesting spirits that we have. You would never know that if you never looked up his character. What he ends up being is gender bend waifu bait with no actual dialogue, nothing to say, because nobody cares for Naja. Want to know why? Because you never gave them a reason to care, other than Naja just looking good, and it happens a lot. Why are these people there just being placeholders? Again, at that point, it could have just been anybody. America. I be forgetting that the America chapter even happened, because in my mind, it's so far from what it really is that it might as well be Edison Smokes a Blunt chapter. This is America on Drugs chapter. That was not America. I don't know what that was. That was a combination of a lot of things with some pseudo-American elements. America, in its ascension, was really on that. The War of 1812, the Trail of Tears, the Revolutionary War, the transatlantic trade. Do you think that FGO is really about to get that political? They just want to say that we went to America. That's really it. I highly doubt that they really want to get into the nitty-gritty of what's really went down here, especially given the relationship that Japan has with America. If anything, I'm expecting them to make America look good, which they do in fact do a phenomenal job of, by completely avoiding anything that will make America look bad at all. And to give a quick rundown for the people that don't get it, because I know somebody's gonna say you just complained the whole video because they didn't listen. Dialogue for the main character, bad ends, the willingness to commit, the willingness to have actual stakes, proper characterization, background authenticity, lack of a proper roster in a chapter, lack of motivations, failure to capitalize on the setting, hyper focusing on the wrong characters, so on and so forth.